And starting off this hour, May Day, International Workers' Rights Day, or May Day as it's known, is underway today. And everywhere from Greece to Turkey to Europe and beyond, people from all walks of life are making their way onto the streets protesting current economic inequalities as well as workers' rights. Now, historically associated with the labor movement, this day has come to encompass many other causes in the U.S. under the umbrella of the Occupy movement. Issues like Wall Street reform and immigration have taken center stage. Now, for more on this May Day past and present, joining me now is RT's own Sam Sachs here in the D.C. studio and Anastasia Churkina in New York. Sam, let's start with you. Why is this day so important for the labor community?
Well, I mean, the day goes back pretty long ways. I mean, this goes back to the dark days of the Gilded Age in 1886, when workers were trying to organize for an 8-hour workday, when workers were fighting against automation. We saw automation already taking over the workplace as far back as the late 19th century. So this was the beginning of the labor movement. It all came to a head in 1886 on May 4th in Haymarket Square. There was a peaceful rally going on, some striking workers. That turned violent. A bomb was thrown into the crowd. The police opened fire. Lots of people were killed, and it was actually used by police and by the government to crack down on a lot of extremist organizations, you know, what they referred to as anarchists or far-left socialists. But also the effect of that is it strengthened the labor community as well in response to the kind of this aggression from the police. And out of that, a few years later, you saw around the world these kind of movements rising up around May, commemorating what happened in Haymarket Square, and also just taking this global struggle for workers during the age of the Industrial Revolution, when conditions for workers weren't very good, building and building and building. Certainly a lot of history there, Sam. So, Anastasia, I understand that you were actually on the ground today where the protesters were earlier. Can you give us some experiential knowledge of what was happening?
Well, Margaret, several actions taking place in New York City today, as well as in other big cities throughout the United States. And what we saw earlier today and are going to continue witnessing throughout the day are protests involving unions where groups are gathering to conduct several actions throughout the city. The numbers are only beginning to kind of increase right now. The day is only getting started this afternoon, really. We did see people marching throughout the city for many blocks, and people were really, you know, chanting and were there out on the streets to voice their discontent with economic inequality, with union busting, with you know, wages, with workers' rights. We talked to some people on the ground, and they were certainly very vocal about why they're out on the streets today. Take a listen.
Other people in high places, I'm not in high places. I don't have things that other people have. That's why I am standing here. That's why I'm marching for equality. Equality, fairness for everybody. Fairness. One have one, one have one. It's not supposed to be one have two and the other have one. Equality for everybody. That's why I'm marching right here.
I'm here today in May Day because, unfortunately, a lot of companies pay their advertised jobs at pay below minimum wage. And I think that's a big problem.
You know, is this May Day protest, is this just a single day, or could we see this prolonged activity from these groups?
Is that to me, Margaret?
Yes, yes. Are we going to see this span out?
You know, that's a curious question, because certainly it's important to keep in mind that comparing the numbers of people who are out on the streets to, for example, last year, when we saw thousands and thousands of people kind of heated up by the moment of the popularity of the Occupy Wall Street movement come out on May Day, certainly the numbers that we have been seeing today are a lot less. We're talking about, you know, hundreds of people at most. We're going to see if those numbers grow. So really it's going to depend a lot on whether or not the labor movement and the unions are going to be able to accumulate these numbers again, and that is going to tell us whether or not we can expect more from the groups out on the streets after May Day today.
Certainly. Well, Sam, is May Day taken more seriously in other parts of the world than it is here in the United States, do you think?
Well, May Day, or what's International Workers' Day as it's referred to, I mean, this is really only this is not really celebrated in the United States. I mean, you see these actions. Organizations have taken it upon themselves to claim this day within the United States, but we traditionally have celebrated, you know, workers on Labor Day, which is a different day of the year. That came out of political sensitivities at the time. I think it was President Cleveland was a little bit uncomfortable with commemorating this massacre that happened in Haymarket Square as a day moving forward for workers. So he instead turned it to Labor Day. But this is really important, a day in the developing world, especially in places like Indonesia, in Turkey, and in Bangladesh. We're seeing massive protests in these kind of low-wage nations that are kind of going through those same conditions that workers in the United States were going through when they were fighting for their rights in the late 19th century. You know, we just had the factory collapse in Bangladesh, killing more than 300 people. So we have workers out there rallying for workplace safety now. So a lot of the same issues that animated the first strike and action that created May Day are still kind of animating today throughout the world.
It sounds like it. Well, it also sounds like we may have intentionally changed the date here. But Anastasia, I want to take it back to you. So what's the U.S. reluctance to officially join the rest of the world in these celebrations?
Well, Margaret, you know, I think that depends on the situation surrounding kind of social movements at a specific current time, at a specific year. We just heard, you know, Sam explain that definitely the shift towards workers' rights is definitely has been moved to Labor Day, and certainly that is kind of the day when workers' rights are marked in a sense. But it's important to keep in mind that it really kind of May Day is a great opportunity for people concerned with these issues, with wealth inequality, with workers' rights, with, you know, today we saw students coming out onto the streets concerned with huge student debt in the United States. All of these issues, really, May Day is a great opportunity to come out and voice your concern about them again. So it really depends, you know, for last year, for example, the huge numbers, they were motivated by the Occupy Wall Street movement. This year seems to have dwindled, certainly, and the question is why that is the case. And, you know, we don't know. Do the people need somebody to kind of rally them around? Or, I mean, because certainly these issues have not died in the United States.
Yeah, and if I could add on to that, I think Anastasia was right. We saw that kind of uptick in support last year as a result of the Occupy movement. But we've also seen these kind of sporadic labor actions since Occupy. We had the Walmart strike. We've had the longshoremen Walmart strike about safer working conditions and better pay. We had the longshoremen going on strike to go against outsourcing. We just had the fast food workers go on strike demanding better wages. So we've seen kind of a rebirth of labor action going back to the Occupy movement that could be, you know, fueling this for the future.
So, Sam, you've given us some examples of how the labor struggle in the U.S. has changed. Can you give me some examples of how it may not have changed, that it's still remaining the same since the first May Day?
Yeah, well, you know, the first May Day, they were fighting automation. They were fighting the fact that, you know, they didn't need blacksmiths anymore because they had these mechanized hammers that were molding tools and everything. We're dealing with automation today. If you look over the last 40 years in the workplace, productivity has skyrocketed as a result of machines and automation, whereas worker wages have stayed flat. They haven't increased with their increased productivity. You also have, as a result, you have CEOs making 1,000 times. The ratio from CEO to pay to worker pay is 1,000 times greater today than it was in the 1950s.
We need to take it back to Anastasia. We're running out of time here, but Anastasia, can you tell me, so what's happening in today's political and economic climate that's inspiring this May Day, do you think?
Well, Margaret, definitely a lot of issues. And again, many of the issues that were brought up by Occupy Wall Street when that movement was kind of at its peak. Certainly people are still talking about the corporate greed, the low wages, the wealth inequality, the 1% versus the 99%, all of these messages we've heard before. We talked to them again today about what they think is the major disconnect between the political and economic realities and the concerns of the people on the street. This is what they told us.
20 years ago, 60% of the people in this country are in unions. Today, it's down to 30%. If we don't get out there and voice our opinion, it'll just keep going further and further down. It's not about what we want today, it's what we want tomorrow and the next day and for my children.
It's absolutely about a long-term decline in the power of workers against the corporate. Really, it's a corporate state, right? The state's completely controlled by private capital.
So certainly, Margaret and Sam, people are out there, you know, all of these issues remain. They've been around for years. They're still, you know, being addressed by the people coming out onto the streets. Whether or not it's going to take kind of more of a mass movement throughout the day, we're going to have to see when, as the day unravels.
I see. Well, we're going to have to leave it there, guys. A lot of information. That was RT correspondent Sam Sachs and Anastasia Churkina.